Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I begin, I'd like to share that I'll be splitting my time. I'm glad to have the chance to rise to share more about why Greens cannot support this amendment, but will continue to support C-59, the Fall Economic Statement, despite its imperfections. Now, let's be clear. This amendment says essentially let's not move forward with C-59 at all in its entirety, and instead, let's just repeal the carbon tax under the guise that this is going to help people across the country dealing with issues with respect to the unaffordability of day-to-day life. Well, we can't support the amendment because repealing the carbon tax won't do the vast majority of Canadians who are having a difficult time with the cost of living any good. There's a reason why. All the talk of food banks in this place, if any parliamentarian were to take a look at what food banks are actually calling for example, what is the Daily Bread Food Bank calling for in their pre-budget submission? They actually have 3 recommendations. All 3 of them call for increasing and moving quickly to put in place the Canada Disability Benefit, to provide support to people with disabilities who are disproportionately living in poverty across the country. 40% of people living in poverty across the country are people with disabilities, and groups like the Daily Bread Food Bank have been joining in solidarity with the disability community to call on this government to move quicker to put in place a Canada Disability Benefit that would bring people with disabilities above the poverty line. No mention of that in this motion that would just get rid of everything else that's in the Fall Economic Statement. But not only that, repealing the carbon tax would mean removing the rebates that go with it, which leave lower income Canadians in my community better off. It is true. The carbon tax went up 2 cents a litre last year, and rebates went up along with it. Now, the profits, pure profits, of the oil and gas industry in the same period of time, they went up 18 cents a litre. No rebates for any Canadians on that gouging. That's not just the total profits, that's only the increase. They went up from around 26 cents a litre to around 42 cents a litre or so. Pure profits of the oil and gas industry gouging Canadians, leading to their, I'll get the number to be specific, $38 billion a year in profits from the 5 largest oil and gas companies operating in Canada in 2022 alone. That's after share repurchases and dividends are all issued. It's why folks like myself and others have been calling to put in place a windfall profit tax on these excess profits of the oil and gas industry, the way many other jurisdictions already have all around the world. In fact, this government put in place a windfall profit tax on another sector already. In the midst of the pandemic, banks and life insurance companies had an extra 15% tax on profits over $1 billion. It's been done before in this country. We could do the same when it comes to the oil and gas industry. And if we did, we could use those dollars to invest in real solutions to help address the unaffordability of day-to-day life for Canadians who need it the most. For example, by increasing service and reducing fares for public transit across the country. For example, by making it cheaper and providing more incentives for Canadians who want to retrofit their homes. These are the kinds of measures that would actually help address affordability. Repealing the carbon tax won't do anything to help Canadians who are struggling with day-to-day life. Now, on the subject of the Fall Economic Statement itself, while it is imperfect, Greens have been supporting it because there are many measures included that will help folks in my community and others across the country. The first I'd like to share with you about, Madam Speaker, is when it comes to making psychotherapy and counseling services more affordable. There was a long-held promise and commitment that was committed to and followed through on in C-59 to remove GST and HST from those services. a small measure that will make it more affordable for more Canadians across the country to have access to mental health services. I would expect all parliamentarians would likely agree in this place that we need to do more to make mental health services more available. Admittedly, this government actually committed $4.5 billion in the last election campaign for mental health transfer. They haven't followed through on that, but they did put in place this measure to remove GST, HST from psychotherapy services. It's an important, good measure that as Greens, we want to see made available to Canadians as soon as possible. There are also really important tax credits that will help bring along support for renewable energy across the country. There are tax credits that will benefit companies in my community like VCT Group that are designing and building the future of solar energy. And in fact, in conversations with VCT Group and their executives over the last year, they've shared with me directly how contracts that they would like to see move ahead are being held back because these tax credits aren't yet in place. And prospective customers of theirs don't have the business case to move ahead unless they see these tax credits in place. Even with the tax credits, the payback period for certain projects are still particularly long, but there are far more potential customers of theirs that would be open to moving ahead should we see C-59 and the clean manufacturing tax credit included in it move ahead also. It's one of the reasons why Greens have been so keen to finally get to the end of the day when it comes to getting C-59 passed. Again, this is the fall economic statement. We're in the late spring months now and have yet to see it move through. We're keen to see measures like this moved ahead with. In fact, it was at committee that Greens tried to even improve on this to have that tax credit. As it stands right now, these tax credits are only available not only if the manufacturing happens in Canada, but the use of the equipment has to be exclusively in Canada also. As Greens, we attempted to amend the bill at committee to allow for solar-powered lawnmowers, for example. A company called Swap Robotics in my community manufactures those. However, they're only used in Canada half the year. They're used in Florida half the year. And because they're used outside of Canada half the year, companies like Swap Robotics won't be eligible for that tax credit. As Greens, we would have liked to seen that expanded further. We weren't successful with that at committee. What is in the fall economic statement is still an important and good measure. We're still going to support it. I'd like to close, though, with the one piece of C-59 that we're most concerned with, and that is another fossil fuel subsidy. It is a massive tax credit for a climate false solution called carbon capture and storage. The tax credits that are in C-59 and have been rolled out for the last 3 years amount to $5.7 billion. All of which could be redirected to, for example, actually funding the Canada Disability Benefit, could be redirected to building public transit infrastructure, instead being wasted on this false solution, technology that more often than not around the world emits more carbon than it captures. I'll read you a quote in closing here from Environmental Defense back in 2021. These are the words of Julia Levin warning this government not to create the tax credits they did create, including in C-59. Her words, quote, "Carbon capture is being used as a Trojan horse by oil and gas executives to continue and even expand fossil fuel production. It's a dangerous distraction driven by the same polluters who created the climate emergency. The Government of Canada should not use any kind of financial support or tax incentive to prop up false climate solutions that only serve to delay the necessary transition off of fossil fuels." I could not agree more with Ms. Levin. Climate scientists around the world have been warning us to get our dollars focused on the most efficient use of funds. It's certainly not the case with this subsidy to carbon capture and storage. However, on balance, C-59 has measures that we need to see move ahead, and Greens will be supporting it. Thank you.